Great. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our webinar around agriculture and the dynamics of stress. We have Miss Monica McConkey here with Eyes on the Horizon, and we are continuing our webinars around reducing stress in native agriculture. Monica has 23 years of experience in the behavioral health field, and her career focus is to help to increase access to and remove the stigma that may be attached to mental health services in rural and underserved areas. I look forward to seeing all the topics that she'll go over tonight. If you have any questions, you're welcome to use the chat box. And this webinar will be recorded so you can watch it in the future. But with that said, thank you, Monica, for being with us tonight. And I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dawn. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to talk with you all. As Dawn said, I work in the mental health field, and I work specifically, really my focus is mental health and agriculture. So in Minnesota, the legislature funds two positions that our counselors and who are counselors and work with farmers and ranchers and their families, and I'm one of the two. So I'm out on farms a lot, meeting with folks, working through really tough issues, doing a lot of Zooms, taking a lot of phone calls. And then I do a lot of speaking and training on rural mental health and agriculture kind of topics. So that's my work. I grew up on a farm in northwestern Minnesota, actually on the White Earth Nation. So it was an interesting growing up because I was a white farm kid growing up on reservation land that my great grandfather purchased in the early 1900s. And we never um, participated, knew about, talked about any of the Native American culture that was happening right where we lived because of just the intense racial tension that was happening at the time. It was really like two separate worlds when I think back. So I went away to grad school and or undergrad and grad school and got my degrees and came back and worked in the school district on the reservation that served Monoman and Natiwash. And that's when I learned so much. When I worked with Native American kids and their families and was welcomed into their homes and went to their events and built trust, and it was an incredible um, first dozen years of my career and very rich. So I just put that out there so you know kind of where I've come from, where my history is. Right now, I live outside of Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and really my work, as I said, focuses around mental health and agriculture. So we're going to start by just talking about some factors that impact the health and well-being of egg producers. And I'll use terms like farmer, producer kind of interchangeably. I know if you're a rancher, they don't like to be called farmers, but I'm including everybody. When I say farmer, rancher, producer, I'm talking male, female, farm and ranch families, kind of the whole unit, the whole system. So we'll start just with factors that impact the health, the stress level, the well-being of our egg producers. And at the top of that list, of course, is weather, natural disasters, climate change challenges, drought, flooding, all of those things that really impact the health uh, of our operation. Like, are we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? And of course, there's nothing that we can do about that. Commodity markets, another fluctuating unknown and general uncertainty, like with the change in leadership now in the country, the kind of the threat of tariffs, what impact is that going to have on us? What's the global economy? How are they going to respond? Just so much uncertainty, which can drive stress. Agriculture is also kind of a dangerous, I guess you can say, occupation on one of OSHA's, kind of high on OSHA's list of dangerous occupations, lots of injuries uh, among farm workers and farmers and their families. Isolation is another driving, what I would say, a risk factor that when we are working out on farms or on ranches, oftentimes we may find ourselves working in isolation. So when we start to struggle with depression or anxiety or overwhelm, it's easy to increase that isolation and withdraw from people. And that is definitely a red flag or a warning sign, I would say. Land access, competition for land, another huge stressor, increased need for competency as technology is growing all the time in ag, trying to keep up with that. The irregular and uncertain income, uh, it's not like we get, monthly checks. It's when we sell our commodities and when is that? Do we hold off waiting for prices to increase? How do we market? All of those factors. Long solitary work hours, which kind of goes along with isolation, and then barriers to help. And so this is huge because when we talk rural and farming, there's a general lack of services available, not only in specialty medical care, but in therapy and counseling and mental health. There's also a lot of attitudes and perceptions related to the stigma of reaching out for mental health help or substance use help that exist in our rural communities. And some of that is driven by us not being anonymous in our communities. Like people know us, they know our families, they know what we do, they know our parents, our kids. And so when we're struggling, it becomes like this known thing in the community. And so many times people stuff that down because they don't want other people to know or to see them as vulnerable or not being able to handle life. And then, of course, we run into, for some folks, health insurance issues related to copays and deductibles and just the expense of seeking care. Um, Not only is it not available, but it can be very expensive. Okay, I'm going to touch on suicide. Uh, Especially for this group, because we know that suicide rates among Native American communities are very high, above the national average, significantly above the national average, and so are suicides in rural areas, as well as suicides among egg producers. So that's three demographics that kind of come together with this group. And so I just wanted to touch on that. These slides, I need to give credit to QPR, so question, persuade, and refer. The QPR Institute has a suicide prevention training. Some of you have probably taken it. It's a 1 hour, one to 1.5 hour, really straightforward training on how to question, persuade, and refer people who are having thoughts of suicide. If anybody's interested, I'm a QPR facilitator. I can talk to you more about that. But I kind of extracted a few of their slides just to look at some stats when we're talking rural and when we're talking Native American. So the first slide I pulled out is that across the United States, the average death rate due to suicide is right around 15 for every 100,000 people on average. But look at the states that make the top 10. We've got Montana, Alaska, Wyoming, New Mexico, North Dakota, Idaho, Utah, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Colorado. I mean, what kinds of things, and you can put this into chat, what kinds of things do those states have in common? We have a little map here, which is the top view. Yeah, they're all very rural. They're rural. There's many tribal nations located in those states. So when we talk rural, with low population density and lots of farming and ranching, Yep. So rural, low population density, typically higher poverty rates, fewer services, less workforce to serve the people that live there. And that drives suicide rates, greater geographic isolation, which can often lead to greater social isolation. So we compare those with states that have the lowest suicide rates in our country. There are more populated states, which then leads us to be able to assume there's greater access, ease of access for services, and a greater number of services available, less geographic isolation. All right, the other slide I pulled from QPR is around rates according to ethnic group. And these are stats from 2022. That's the most recent we have. So when we look at males and females, for every 100,000 males in our country, almost 24 died by suicide in 2022. For every 100,000 females in our country, almost a little more than 6 died by suicide in 2022. When we look at the Indigenous, American Indian, Alaska Native population, significantly above average for both males and females. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. So in 22, for every 100,000 Native American men, 36 died by suicide. And for every 100,000 Native American women, almost 9 died by suicide. And then I won't take time going through the others, but you can see the comparison. And then I think I took one more slide from QPR, and that's trends related to youth suicide. And there were 5 trends that popped up in 2022. And just the 2 I want to highlight here are, I'm going to use a little annotation tool. I haven't done that before. We'll see how it works. Okay, are Native American and Alaska Native youths in middle school, high school, college age, almost twice as high, their suicide rate almost twice as high as the national average, paired with youth in middle school, high school, college age in rural areas, nearly twice as likely to die by suicide as those in large metro. Okay, oh boy, now my little annotation is going to stick. How do I, oh, it looks like there's an eraser.
I didn't know.
Okay, well, that
I
was
didn't know it
easy.
moved to the next slide. Okay, that's good to know for next time.
Yeah, they stay. Didn't know that. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about grief and loss. This is something that we don't talk about a lot in agriculture. Typically, we think about grief primarily when we lose someone close to us and we're grieving that death. But grief is so much more than that. It's the normal response of sorrow, heartache, and confusion that comes from losing someone or something important to you. It's the inevitable companion to love and attachment. So think about that. Think about not just loss of life, but loss of property, loss of normalcy. A natural disaster comes through. I talked with a rancher in Western North Dakota who had major impact from the wildfires there, lost most of his animals, and every building on the farm was damaged on the ranch. So total loss of normalcy. Loss of security. We grieve loss of security when things in our lives become unstable. If our job falls apart, if our life is not turning out how we hoped and dreamed it would be, that's a loss that can definitely throw us into grief. Loss of relationships, friendships, um, and loss of a legacy, a family legacy, um, a cultural legacy. These are all things that happen regularly in agriculture, and we don't talk a lot about it. But there's the ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster. And many times people are grieving and we don't acknowledge that it's grief. Okay, really quickly, warning signs. These are things to look for both in yourself, although a lot of times we don't recognize it. People around us will recognize it in us before we do. Um, but in other people, especially if they are isolating more, if there are mood changes up or down. So we tend to think of a warning sign as just a low mood change, like they're more depressed, they're more angry, they're sad all the time. But a mood change can also be they're really elevated, they're like super happy after being depressed. It just seems like such a major shift. That's a warning sign. If people are selling things off, if they're selling off their livestock, if they're selling off their equipment, and it just doesn't really fit with kind of how the understanding of how their operation was going to go. If things are falling into disrepair, so if they've typically kept equipment running, livestock's looking good, fence lines are good, and then all of a sudden things are falling apart, that is a warning sign. Then you can see some others, sleep, uh, increased substance use is a big one. People often turn to alcohol and drugs to cope with painful emotions that they don't know what to do with. And so at least when I can drink or use, I can kind of set them to the side. If they're showing a lack of motivation, they're just not interested in things anymore. Bills aren't getting paid. This sense or statements around hopelessness. It's never going to get better. I'm never going to make it. I don't know why I try. All warning signs. Also, if the family is exhibiting stress. So when we talk about a family is a system. So kind of like gears, right? That have to think of like a belt or a chain going around gears. And if one gets off, it impacts the whole running of the system. So a family unit is very similar, where if one person is struggling or if one person has an adverse event happen to them, if one person is depressed or anxious or struggling with substance use, it shifts the functioning of the other members of the family in some way. Sometimes when there's a lot of stress in relationships, we'll see it come out in the kids. So we'll see kids doing, poorly at school where they used to do okay. We might see kids getting picked up for DUIs, using substances more, isolating more. And it's kind of in response to what's happening in that family system. So something to watch for, because sometimes as adults, we can kind of hold it together and keep our appearances like everything's fine, nothing's wrong. Kids are more emotionally based, so they will just show it through their behavior that something's not right. Like I don't feel stable, I've lost structure, I don't feel secure, and they're going to act that out. Okay, I just want to run through what happens to us in our brains and body when we're stressed, because I feel like when we can know this, it helps us take a step back and just say, okay, this is what's happening to me right now. I am not the problem. I'm not failing. There's nothing wrong with me. Like this is literally how our brains are geared toward stress. So when we have a stressful incident that happens, immediately this small part in our brain is about the size of an almond, and it's called the amygdala. That is the place that stores all of our memories and all of our emotions together. So if we have had stressful things happen to us in our lifetime, that stress, that emotion, that fear is linked to that event. So let's say I met with a guy a few months ago that he was lived in North Dakota. Uh, he was driving down I-94 like last winter, the winter before, got into a significant accident, icy roads. Not his fault. So he gets through that winter. Now all of a sudden winter is coming again. And so immediately that piece in his brain that has linked winter and ice with bad car accident is firing, right? Let's say you've had an experience where you've been assaulted by someone and they've been wearing the color blue. That is linked in our brains so that when we see someone wearing the color blue or even just the color blue, we can be triggered. So it's basically we're talking about the amygdala is what sends triggers. We look at triggers as negative, but triggers are there as a life-saving mechanism. Our brain's job is to keep us safe. So if we have had any danger, any sense of danger, any fear, anything that has happened in our past, and our brain senses it coming again, it's going to do whatever it can to protect us. So we're sensing something that's stressful. Maybe it's something that's happening in the moment. Maybe it's something we're worried about happening in the future. Same response. So the amygdala says, yep, there's danger attached to this. There's stress attached to this. This is not good. Sends a signal out to the rest of our body, and our adrenaline goes up, heart beats faster, pulse rate, blood pressure up, breathing rapid. We get kind of super focused in terms of our senses, and then glucose and fats are released in order to help us do what? Fight or flight. Those are the two that we're most familiar with. So then we're in a stress response. And the four stress responses are fight, flight, where we take off either physically or internally, freeze, where we just freeze up, don't know what to do, we're paralyzed, or fawning, which is like kind of like people pleasing. So I see fawning a lot in kids who have been in difficult situations in their home where there's been maybe some domestic violence, uh, an angry parent. And fawning can sound a lot like, I know you're upset with me. What did I do? How come you're mad at me? Where we're looking for reassurance that everything's okay. So just know that when you are faced with something stressful, it's going to kick off things in your brain and body that are linked to previous experiences in your life. Now, this is a life-saving mechanism because if we're in life or death situations, we don't have to stop and think about what to do. So you'll notice thinking is nowhere in this group of bullet points. The thinking part of our brain shuts down when our stress response turns on. The emotional part of our brain is firing. The thinking rational part of our brain shuts down. This is really good in life or death. So imagine you're in the pasture, bull starts chasing you. You don't have to stop and think about what to do, right? You don't have to run through like multiple choice. Should I run? Should I lay down and play dead? Should I try to climb a tree? Should I yell at it? No, we just run. You just run. So great in life or death situations, but the reality is most of the stress we deal with, not life or death. It's finances, it's relationships, it's weather, it's, the cattle not cooperating with us when we're trying to work them. But our brains, there's no differentiation. We still go into a stress response. So it's important for us to know this, like when it's happening, to get a hold of it. And to get a hold of it, we'll be talking about some things, but to get a hold of it, we want to turn our thinking brain back on and calm our emotions down. so we can be calm and rational. Okay, for people that are chronically stressed, and I put this in here because I'm sure some of you on the call are working with farmers and ranchers. And many times our egg producers have been stressed for a long period of time. So their brains are taxed. Like they have not just let their guard down. Now, there's a lot in here because in the Native American population, we can also talk about historic trauma, generational trauma. That all plays into this. But when you are working with chronically stressed people, that their brain has been in that fight or flight mode for sometimes years, there's some key things that can be helpful. One is just to listen, get them talking, if at all possible, and then just be that listener. Whatever you need them to know, be clear and concise. So I talk about this with a lot of like people who work in with USDA or agronomists or nutritionists, where they're working with veterinarians, you're working with a chronically stressed egg producer. They are not going to be able to take in a lot of words and a lot of narrative. So bullet points, bottom line, if they need to know more, write it down because their brain is taxed and they're not going to be able to retain all that info. So things you can write down are good. Check-ins. So if you're working with chronically stressed people, they're going to forget deadlines. They're going to forget to get paperwork in. They're going to forget appointments. They're going to forget to call people. Checking in with them is really important. Like, hey, remember, I'll be out, on Tuesday to talk about whatever. Remember, you have an appointment to come in and fill out this paperwork. So the checking in and then providing resources. So what can help them? Are there programs? Are there podcasts? Are there webinars that can help them try to start to lessen that chronic stress? Another thing that happens for people that are chronically stressed is making a decision becomes really, really hard. Like they might get right to the point of the decision needing to be made, and then it's like they're froze up. And they might pivot to something else so they can leave that alone. And so it'll feel like they're not getting anything done. They're not finishing projects. They're not moving ahead. And it may well be just because of their brain is so taxed with all of the stress. Okay, so what do we do? In 15 minutes, we're going to talk about what to do. We're going to talk about risk factors versus protective factors. Now, what this means is I'll talk about protective factors first. Protective factors are things we either are born into or we build in our life to help us get through tough times. Risk factors are things that we're born into or that happen in our lives that make it more difficult to get through difficult times and often lead to trying to cope in unhealthy ways. So many of us, thank God, have been born into good protective factors. We didn't have to worry about where our food came from. We knew we had a house over our head. We knew who was going to be home. There was security. There was a group of people around us that we could count on that kept us safe. So we had a good head start when it came to protective factors. Then our job is throughout life, we continue to build those to help us get through difficult times. Some people, however, are born into situations where they don't have stability and structure. They don't know if their adult protector is going to be protector or abuser. They don't know if there's going to be consistent food. They don't know if they can trust people. They may not even feel like they're going to have a, where am I going today? I don't even know where I'm going. My home is at risk. So already they are starting in a way that puts them in danger of many things. If you've heard of ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, this is what that's about. That people that have a lot of risk factors in their lives as children grow up to struggle with things like substance use, um, incarceration, obesity, chronic disease, and it follows them through the lifetime. However, we can build, even if we didn't have a great start, we can build protective factors around us to help us get through those difficult times, that stress. And the 4 areas of protective factors that I talk about, let me just see if I put slides in. No, I didn't, so I'll talk through them. The first is biophysical. That simply is taking care of our physical selves. It is drinking lots of water. It is eating decent food. It is taking our medication as prescribed. It is seeing whatever healthcare provider we see on a regular basis. It's sleeping. That is like the foundational piece of taking care of ourselves. Everything else in life is really going to be built from there because you know how it is when you're sick. That's like what rules your life, right? If you've had illnesses or chronic disease, you know that your health then rules your life, taking care of yourself. So when we can build that protective factor around us and keep ourselves as physically healthy as we can, boy, does it make it way easier to deal with the stress and pressures life throws at us. When you think about your most stressful time, think about how well do you eat, how well do you sleep, how much water are you drinking? It really goes by the wayside. All of these things do when we're stressed. So the challenge is to continue to really build and nourish these protective factors, especially during times of stress and unbalanced seasons in our lives. So biophysical, first one, taking care of our physical selves. Social is the next one, and that is really around surrounding ourselves with good, solid, supportive people and setting up boundaries with people who are just not good for us. Some we can get out of our lives. We literally can just say, I'm not communicating with that person anymore. I'm not following them on social media. They're just out of my life. Others we can't because they might be a family member. They might be one of our adult kids. They might be somebody we work next to. So they're in our life, whether they're good for us or not. But if they're not good for us, then it's all about how do I set up mental and emotional boundaries around this person. So I'm not putting my mental and emotional energy into them. Like I'm putting my mental and emotional energy into my good, solid relationships and people. So that's the second protective factor. Third is psychological. This, you guys, is all about how we think. Is our thinking working for us or is it working against us? And I thought I had put a slide in here with this, but I didn't. But if you can imagine a triangle, and on the top is thinking. And on the next corner is our feelings or emotions. Our thoughts drive how we feel. So if we're thinking things like, I can't do this, or I'm no good at this is going to fail, this is never going to work out, that drives how we feel. And then the third point of the triangle is like our functioning or our actions. So if our thoughts are, I can't do this, I'm no good at this, I screw up all the time, we're not going to feel, we're going to feel worthless, insignificant, lots of things. That's going to drive our functioning, which means we're not going to communicate well. We're going to probably have an impact in our relationships because our emotions are going to be uh, flaring. We will probably lose motivation because we're feeling worthless. We're not going to feel that drive to meet our goals. And then that reinforces that original thought that I'm not good enough. I can't do this. This isn't going to work. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to fail. It can be a very vicious cycle. The way out of that cycle is with our thinking. We've got to make our thinking and our mindset work for us. It doesn't mean we don't solve problems. But instead of sitting in worry and stress, which is emotional, if we can plan and problem solve, that gets our thinking brain turned back on, our rational brain, and we can move forward. The fourth protective factor area is spiritual. And what spiritual means is how do we embrace what gives us hope? And for some people, that is like traditional religious or faith beliefs. Um, for some people, it's music. For some people, it's being in nature. For some people, it is meditation. It's different things to different people. But at the core of it is what gives you hope for the future. Where does your faith in goodness come from? What feeds your soul? So all of these are protective factors that help us get through times of intense stress, of grief, of trauma. We build this around ourselves. Okay. All right. I did put some resources in here that I know you're all coming from different places, so I didn't get specific on a state or area. These are national resources. 988 being the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available 24/7 to text or call. There's a little bit of like demographic stuff in the beginning that causes some people just to say, oh, forget it and hang up. But just stick with it. I have one farmer who has really struggled with suicidal thoughts and feelings. And during the nighttime hours, when he can't sleep, if he's not doing well and all of his support system is sleeping, he'll text with 988. There's also 741-741, which is a national crisis text line. And you can text the word Native and you will be linked to someone who understands the culture, the Native American culture. There's also this is federal, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They have a website, findtreatment.gov. You can search like in your area, and there'll be a list of either mental health or substance use services. Then Farm Bureau, so this is more egg specific. The National Farm Bureau put together an initiative called Farm State of Mind. And you can search their directory by state. And if there are farm specific mental health or stress resources, they will be in there, as well as some that are more general. And then wherever you're at, I know I'm in Minnesota, we've got a farm and rural helpline. We've got Ted and I as counselors, we've got advocates, we've got mediators all through the Department of Agriculture. So some places to check out for resources. And Dawn, you guys probably have a list as well. This is my contact info. Happy to chat anytime if you want to talk through a situation, if you're worried about somebody, if you just want a listening ear, you can call, text, or email. I'm happy to listen and just talk about, next steps. So with that, I think we made it. We did 6 minutes early in case anyone has questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monica. Your presentations are always extremely helpful. And this is my second time sitting in with Monica. And I had 3 pages of notes.
Mhm.
In the first one, I had a couple pages. So we really appreciate all your insight and especially around building and nourishing your protective boundaries and layers and all
Mhm.
the examples around that. One thing that I did note was around the grief and the different pieces of the grief that you listed there. I don't think that we
Mhm.
always think of grief in those ways. And so that was really
Right.
good to see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something we don't talk a lot about in agriculture. And, for the Native American community, there's the generational grief as well for loss of lands that it sticks with people. And so we can't discount that impacting as well.
Yeah. And we'll gather our resources on our end too and add them to the ones you offered. There is a comment in the chat, which you might be able to see, but I'll read it out.
Mhm.
Great information, Monica. Thank you so much for your presentation and the work you do. Deep gratitude.
Well, thank you so much.
So I also placed Monica's email and contact information as well as mine in the chat. If you'd like me to connect you, I'd be happy to, but please visit her website and check out the work that she's doing. So glad that we were able to connect so that we could bring you
Yeah.
these key presentations. This is something that our audience have been asking for. And when you all ask, we listen and we find the folks that are the experts in the area. So happy that you all could join us tonight. You're welcome to put any questions in the chat, but I know sometimes you like to have more of a one-on-one conversation. But is there anything else that you want to add, Monica, or close out with?
No, just know that I mean it when I say you can call, text, or email. And I just encourage you that, winter is kind of the time to rest and restore, and we head into spring when there's, the growth and the newness. And when you start getting into those busy times, don't lose sight of taking care of yourself. um, Keep those. I almost think of it like bubble wrap. I had a son who I often, or I have a son who I often, he's actually farms with my family now, and he is one that should have been wrapped in bubble wrap probably since birth. Lots of medical bills with that one. But I think of protective factors is like that. It's like it doesn't keep the hits from coming, but it helps us to get through the hits with a little less damage.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Again, everybody, our info's in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here, but you all have a great night. This will be available on our website.